Okay, it's a bit after 7:30. I will call this meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Bowersox?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth? Mr. Lewis? Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Smythe?
Here.
Ms. Stevenson?
Present.
Ms. Pressing?
Here.
City Council Member Chenoweth did say in advance that she wouldn't be able to be here tonight. For the public, there are a number of people who have already filled out yellow cards, but if you'd like to speak before the council during the public input section of the meeting, there are yellow cards on the back table. You can fill them out and give them to the clerk seated here at the left, and get a chance to address the council for up to 5 minutes on a topic. Are there any additions to tonight's agenda or a staff report?
Just on the staff report, I would note that I believe Aaron has DVD available now of the HUD training. Some of you weren't able to attend that and may be interested in that. There's also a PowerPoint available if you want to, would prefer to do that. If you want it, just contact Aaron directly at CD Department. We did have a deletion on the agenda. Did we get that yet?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Under appointments, right?
Are there any other additions to the agenda? Okay, let's move on to approval of minutes of the previous meeting. We have the minutes before us, and a motion would be in order to approve these June 13 minutes.
So moved. I would second that motion.
Is there any discussion or any corrections? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That motion carries. We will now open the floor for public input. Again, if you're a member of the public and would like to speak before the council, you can fill out one of these yellow cards. I've collected some up here, but feel free to fill them out and give them to the clerk at the left. First up tonight, we have George Carlisle, Jr. of 406 East Green. George, you can come up and take a seat and state your name and address into the record, and then you have 5 minutes to address the council on a topic of your choice.
George Richard Carlisle, Jr. of 406 East Green, apartment 102, just east here, about a block. It comes as no surprise that the shock that we all received last week, gasoline prices getting as high as $2.46 a gallon. That's equivalent to the tax that the state of Rhode Island imposed on a pack of cigarettes, which is the highest in the nation. We need to do something more about getting more frequent mass transit service, especially during rush hour, to the university campus and other places where people go to frequently. I also wholeheartedly endorse the bike path that was discussed earlier tonight. Would like to see possibly for those who live in Behringer Common possibly an underpass under University Avenue in the former Peoria and Eastern Railroad right-of-way, or else maybe have a push-button activated phase of the traffic light at the corner of High Cross and University for that purpose, safety for bicyclists crossing University when that bike path is completed. But we do need something better now. Of course, a number of subdivisions in both cities are fighting against annexation. I had an editorial in Monday, July 4th paper about an impact fee for cars or sticker fee fund transit in place of the current property tax assessment. We need to look into that, something that would be possibly fair to those who do. Those who don't drive, some of the poor people who do not drive, would be in effect cross-subsidized by those who do if the transit service were funded by such a fee. I know way back when, in the 50s, the city did impose a sticker fee on cars. I think it was only $5 or so back then. It would probably have to be on the order of $7,500 a year, or sliding scale, maybe some help to those who would have trouble paying that in order to better fund transit. And we especially need some of the students. I said a lot of the University of Illinois students are creating the congestion that we're having over the Catamount. Realize most of that is west of the border, but both cities do have that problem. And I wish we could get money out of the traffic coming to games, football, basketball games, especially. Particularly some of those were paying as much as triple digits for a ticket, a scout ticket for some of the games, the Illinois basketball games, and if they're able to afford that and all the money they spend on tailgating and so forth, they could surely afford to pay $5 or $10 fee to drive on the streets, adding our congestion, pollution, and the depletion of our petroleum. That seems to be a serious problem right now, but the prices reflect anything on that. And last I say, the bicycle path idea sounds good. We need to have some other paths, like particularly the one that was proposed from the new Judge Weber Park over to Crystal Lake through the area that is scheduled for demolition of the Lakeside Terrace. We do need a path connecting the parks in that area of town. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have Mary Dennis from the Urbana Business Association. Please step forward and you can state your name and address. And joining Mary, we have Carl Hill, also speaking on the topic of the Urbana Business Association. I'll let you two both introduce yourselves and sort of add comments together.
My name's Mary Dennis. I'm with the Urbana Business Association.
Your address.
111 West Main Street in Urbana.
Carl Hill with the Urbana Business Association, also the Home Parade Committee mostly, 1913 Trails Drive in Urbana.
Go right ahead.
I just wanted to introduce myself to you, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the Urbana Business Association for those of you who aren't familiar with our organization. Our mission is to promote Urbana as a dynamic place to live, work, and do business, so that guides all of my work. There are several ways that we fulfill that mission. One is through special events that we host throughout the year. You're all familiar with the Sweet Corn Festival. That's our biggest event, and that's coming up next month. We also do an event in October called the International Beer Tasting and Chili Cook-Off. We do the Market in the Square, which happens after the outdoor market ends in November. We do home parade events, and most recently we did the Great Race Overnight Stop, which was on June 28th in downtown Urbana. Mayor Pressing was there. We do other events throughout the year, including ribbon cuttings, groundbreaking ceremonies, and press conferences for Urbana businesses. We co-hosted an event last spring called Urbana Business Roundtable. Mayor Pressing was there also to meet with some of the business leaders about possibilities for business in Urbana. We had an event in January just to celebrate our successes in Urbana in 2004. We thought things are going well, and we just want to stop and pat ourselves on the back and keep that momentum going for business in Urbana. Other things that we do, we're going to keep the Tourist Information Center up to date. That's the location up on Cunningham Avenue that people stop at as they come into town. We're going to be getting that back in operation again. Also, the radio station, AM 530, which provides tourist information for people coming into Urbana. The Downtown Banner Program, pretty soon you're going to see some banners going up in the downtown area about Sweet Corn Festival and some other things. The Co-op Advertising Program, where we help Urbana businesses get some advertising into the media, and in that way we help promote Urbana also. I do a segment on Channel 3 on WCIA every other Friday morning. It's called On the Town, and basically I talk about things that are going on in Urbana. And then last but not least, the UBA website. If you haven't visited our website, it's urbanabusiness.com, and we do our best to promote Urbana via the website. I think we've made some significant progress in the last year since I started my position as business manager last August. We're certainly better organized. We've got some good positive momentum going. We've got a strong, active board of directors. I couldn't do without the support of some great interns and volunteers that help me in the office, and our hardworking committee members. So we appreciate the support of the mayor and the city council, and hope for your continued support in the months to come. Thank you.
Oh, Mary?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me, does the Urbana Business Association attend national trade shows at all, or conventions where people who would be business owners meet to meet for furthering opportunities in towns and villages across America? Is there such a conference, or are you aware of one at all?
No, I'm not.
So you've never actually, there is no like out-of-state or Chicago-based conference that you're aware of that
Not that I'm aware of.
addresses that kind of concern?
There probably are some, but I'm not aware of them at this point.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Mary.
know.
When the Development Corporation or the Development Department hosts like the businessmen's or businesswomen's, business owners meetings that we're going to have for Sunnycrest area, do you attend those?
I've been attending the developers roundtable meetings that are held at Phillips Recreation Center. So it just depends. If I learn that I'm invited to something, I try and go, so.
Because we have those periodically.
Right, we try to coordinate every 2 weeks on Friday morning, and if something's coming up, I'll tell Mary, and we just try to coordinate. And sometimes I think you might have been to one of them at the Sunnycrest area, and if it turns out that it's possible to schedule her, we do so.
Okay. Thank you.
Carl, would you like to, were there further questions?
I was
for
just
Ms.
going to
Knight?
say that I think you did a fantastic job on the Great Race, and the participants were very pleased. They thought Urbana was one of the best stops they'd ever attended, so
Thank you.
I thank you for that.
Any other questions? Dennis?
Yeah, could I? I went to the Great Race too, and I heard comments that I'll pass along why they thought Urbana was great. They could eat earlier than usual, before 9 o'clock. You served alcoholic beverages with the meal. That was a huge plus, they said. And we had a good band, one of the best that they had heard on the tour so far. And so some people were actually very impressed because of those three things.
Good. I'm glad to
So,
hear.
I mean, I just write those down for the future. These people may or may not come back again, but they based their comments to me on those three things. I thought I should pass it along to you.
We would love to have them come back. They're a great organization to work with. They were so easy to deal with and to work out all these details of the event. It was a huge event, and we didn't even start working on it until February, so we pulled it together really fast, and I was so relieved that everything went well.
I thought it was a huge success.
And they tend to come back to places that treat them well, so we're hoping that we'll get put on their route sometime in the foreseeable future again.
Any other questions from council members?
I was trying to get to their website, but the link seems to not be working. The whole thing. Our wireless link has failed. You have a lunch that you've invited us to on the 20th?
Right.
Okay.
That's going to be at Crystal Lake Park in the pavilion. Urbana Park District is hosting that lunch. It's a brown bag lunch. Drinks and desserts will be provided, and the Urbana Park District is going to be discussing their strategic planning process, so the plans that they have for parks coming up in the next few years. So we hope you can all come.
Carl Hill, would you like to take the floor and give input on the topic of the UBA?
Okay, I think she did a great job. There's a lot to cover, of course. First of all, I want to say hi to most of you new faces from the last time that I was here. And congratulations to all of you. It's nice to see you. I'm looking forward to working with you in the next however many years. I also have a subdivision that I'll be coming to you with in the near future, so there's other things, of course, that we do as developers and builders. I want to discuss just a little bit. I think Bruce will cover a lot of ground on it, but the UBA and the home parade, the main things that I have been involved with in the last 4 or 5 years. We started out as the Urbana Developer and Builders Association. We found that it might make sense to work with the Urbana Business Alliance, so we started discussions with them, and eventually we joined forces so that the developers, a lot of them on the outskirts of town, could join forces with those trying to develop downtown. And I think it's been a very, very successful venture for us. Very glad for your support, the council's support in the past, and hoping for that support maybe more in the future. As you've heard, there's a lot of things that we do try to cover. A lot of volunteers work very hard to put things together. And Mary has, I don't think she knew what she was getting into originally, but she's taken the bull by the horn, I think, and found some wonderful people to work with and directed us all in a good way so that we could accomplish our purpose, and that is to promote Urbana as a dynamic place in which to live, work, and do business. You'll hear me say that often, probably. But as far as the home parade, the tax rebate program started in '01. I've been the chair of the home parade now till now, and now Jim Weisiger is going to be taking my place as the chairman of that committee. We're looking at a little different focus, where originally we were trying to disseminate information about what it was and what the tax rebate was and how it worked. We now have pretty good development happening. We had a lot of lots in '01. We found that we did not need to add a lot of infrastructure to add a lot of homes. In this case, we're thinking over 450 more than we would have had we not had the tax rebate program. So it was a no-brainer. And in fact, I think the first or second year the city was coming back with a 4-to-1. What can I call that? Return. Yeah, that'll work. So for every dollar the city spent, they're getting back 4, and I think at this point it's closer to 7, maybe, for every dollar spent. Is that right, Bruce? But I guess he'll cover some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But just in case he doesn't, we think that it worked very well. The developers, a lot of the builders now in Urbana are very happy. The reorganization and attitude of community development has helped immensely. Urbana is a great place in which to live, work, and do business. And so we're promoting it at that and showing that it is that way, and hope that you'll continue to support us. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Hill? Okay, very good. Thank you both very much.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks.
Next, we will hear from Mr. Jim Hayes on the topic of beauty and recreation. Mr. Hayes, feel free to take a seat and state your name and address for the record.
Jim Hayes, 1204 West Dublin Street in Urbana. Beauty and recreation. This is going to come in 2 parts. The first part, I want to commend staff, council, administration, police department, fire department, and public works for the fine job they did with the race across Urbana. That was a wonderful project, and Captain Rat and the Rivets was the name of the band, and when they changed all their different costumes and whatnot, that provided great joy for the parents and the kids. So I want to thank everybody for supporting the Urbana Business Association. The second part, beauty and recreation. And there was several weeks ago, there was a discussion on the park on the corner of Dublin and Goodwin. A little history on that park. It was the area run down, a catastrophic kind of situation. So at that time I checked with Robin Hall, because I thought the park belonged to the Urbana Park District, but it didn't. It belonged to the city of Urbana. So I brought this to the attention of the administration, and they checked on it somewhat, but what they did do, they tore down the old wooden fence that was there. They put down rows, crushed rock, so that when it settled, you wouldn't have to worry about a lot of upkeep. There's a lot of mulch around the area, several mature trees, so that means there's shade out there all the time. They put flowers and shrubbery out there, perennials in springtime. So it really is a beautiful place, and there'll probably be some more improvements later on. I think one of the main things that park might need is a sign letting people know when the park is closed. Right now, there's no limit on whether or not the park will be open or closed. Another thing you might consider is give it a name. You know, right now everybody's talking about the park on the corner of Beslin and Goodwin. But if it had a name, then everybody would know, you know, where it was. Something similar to people living in Lakeside Terrace. Okay, they don't have an address; they got a destination. And so this way, if you get a park a name and not close it, and come up with some rules and enforce the rules, I think it'll be a beautiful addition to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Are there any questions for Mr. Hayes?
Yeah, Jim, do you think putting some kind of a small light near the benches would be in order, especially if it could be back shaded so it didn't bother the houses that are there?
Yeah, that might help a little bit.
Okay. Would the lights stay there? I mean, you know, or would it be vandalized? That's one of the issues.
Well, the city put a nice garbage can out there, and people who use it usually put the trash in the garbage can. And I spoke to several of the participants, and they don't seem to be trashing it right now. So
I've gone by it a couple of times, and it just seems like a nice little corner park.
Right. So there's a reason I'm saying that, you know, we need to enhance it.
Okay. What kind of hours would you suggest it should have?
Well, I don't think they should be open later than 10 o'clock at night.
Okay. Now, some of the city parks, or the Urbana parks, are, you know, dawn to dusk sort of thing. Would that be appropriate instead of, say, fixed hours, that it shuts, you know, when it's dark, it's shut?
I don't know. I think that's a toss-up.
Okay. Now, give it some thought, and maybe if you can talk to a few people, and maybe Mr. Lewis has some feelings for it. But I know that, you know, there are city parks that are the Urbana parks, that some that are open till 10 and some that close at dusk. So.
But we're in this situation before. This is the only park that the city of Urbana owns. So this is a stepping stone.
Do other council members have questions for Mr. Hayes? Dennis?
I had a thought, but it's really not for Jim.
Others?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Okay, next for public input, we have Chris Storr, representing the Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association. I'm sorry, Chris wants to speak at the time of an agenda item. We'll be discussing streetlights, and Chris Storr and Lisa Power, I have you both listed as speakers at the time of that agenda item. Are there any more members of the public who would like to speak now in general during public input? If you, sir, you could come forward and state your name and address into the record if you'd like. Thanks. It's so everybody at home can catch your comments as well.
Thank you. I intended to speak before item 13A, extending a grant for the Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association, and I'll wait until that time.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak now? Okay, if not, are there any council members who have reports or comments to add at this time? Mr. Smythe?
Yeah, real quick. The Urbana Free Library Foundation is sponsoring a day to dedicate their new statue on July 30th. That will begin with a race, the Tortoise and the Hare, at 8 a.m. Saturday morning, July 30th. Entry forms can be found on their website at the at urbanafreelibrary.org. There's a downloadable or printable PDF that if people are interested in running. If you're interested in volunteering for the race, you should contact me sometime in the next week or so. Item number 2 is that I remind council members that we'll be meeting as caucus at 6 p.m. next Monday, preceding the council meeting for about an hour, hour and a half. 6 o'clock upstairs in the second floor conference room. Please send me any revisions or comments you have on the goals. We will get nice printed out copies courtesy of Public Works.
Great. Yeah, Ms. Barnes?
2 things. First of all, I want to let you know that a couple weeks ago I was able to attend the newly elected officials meeting up in one of the suburbs, and that was very interesting. And what I did was I put together a little summary packet, which I've given to the city clerk's office, and asked the city clerk to make copies of that for you all. Just a few things that I thought were of more importance and interest, and I didn't know how many of us were able to attend. So just FYI, that should be coming from the city clerk sooner or later, okay?
Great, thank you.
And then secondly, I'd like to give a brief report on our Philo Road Cleanup Day, which turned out to be pretty fun. And we had 26 people come, and we wore T-shirts that said, "Don't mess with Urbana." And the city supported us significantly and brought a garbage truck. And also, Bruce was there along with another gentleman who drove the truck, and our mayor was present. And we spent 2 hours cleaning and collected 50 bags of garbage. And frankly, that only made a dent because we did not go behind the big boxes, and we also didn't focus on that hedge that's along Florida Avenue just east of Philo Road, which, next to Kmart, which was quite intense. But we made a nice, I think, impact. And we also sent letters to all of the businesses in the area, inviting them to participate and just letting them know what we were up to, thinking that would assist us in just helping to, I think, really make our point that we're watching, because we're very interested to see if we can, do all that we can as individuals who live and work in the neighborhood to make it look as good as possible, so that we can have an improved effect on maybe drawing some additional businesses to the area, as well as drawing people to the area to buy goods and services. So there are some, we also gave out 3 awards, which I want to announce. The SUNA group was very instrumental in helping to support this effort, and we prepared 3 awards for businesses who we believed gave careful attention to landscaping and also maintained debris-free properties. And the 3 award recipients were the Caring Hands Veterinary Clinic, which is right on Philo Road there, Busey Bank, Sunnycrest, and then also the Family Video Store. And so we presented those in person. Several individuals from the group went over there, and we kind of made a big deal of it, and I think they were positively received. There are some other positives about Philo Road. Of course, the new gas station work has begun, and that's a positive, and they cleaned up the backyard of that area. I mean, they're in that process of kind of tearing things down. So new stuff should be showing soon. And then also the city, of course, has started their landscaping along Philo Road. So that's putting some low-maintenance perennials in there in an attempt to kind of, enhance the look of that. And also I wanted to point out that there's a gentleman who purchased the building at 1005 Colorado, Mike Hatfield, and I spent some time touring his building and just looking at all the changes that he's making. This has been a trouble spot in terms of some crime and a lot of police calls. And Mr. Hatfield's purchased the building. He's pretty much gutted it, really cleaning it up. And what I'm impressed about is that he's trying to put in a lot of plans to thwart potential unlawful activity. For example, he's putting pea gravel around the whole outside, the perimeter of the building, because there are low windows there, and that way people will be able to hear if there's people walking outside their window. He's got several lighting fixtures that are going to be strategically placed. He's putting a lot of thought into it, and I just appreciate it. I appreciate that he's really making an effort, and I wanted to acknowledge him because I think that's a positive for Colorado Avenue. Now, we've got some some issues that I've talked to Bruce about, and Bruce took some good notes that day that we were working, and I've listed them here for you. But there's some, it's a start, there's some things that I think we need to tackle, and I'll be talking with Bruce and Heather to talk about how we might tackle each one of these bullet points. But we are going to try to address some of these things because there's some areas of just that maintenance needs to be addressed in some of the buildings on Philo Road, and so we want to work with some of the owners to do that. And then I think just a bigger issue, and I think maybe we can talk about it at our caucus, is really the issue of just the crime activity in the apartments in both Ward 6 and Ward 7, and what tools maybe can we give to our police to address that. And so I think that's something that maybe we can talk about in terms of a potential priority, at least for the Wards 6 and 7. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions other council members have for Lynn? Yeah, Mayor.
Oh, I was going to go on to something else.
Okay. Any questions? Wonderful. Okay. Yes, Mayor, you also have a report. to give?
Yes. I'd like to talk about a problem that has developed with the Champaign County Board. Urbana, Champaign, and Champaign County Board in 1994, I think after many years of negotiation, signed an agreement that the county would not discriminate against funding roads that are in the urban fringe, and in exchange the cities would give the county rebates on sales taxes from businesses that have been annexed to the cities. Unfortunately, on May 19th this year, the county board adopted a resolution to cap the amount spent on urban fringe roads to no more than $1 million a year. They're going to spend $2 million a year on the 200 miles of rural county highways. And I should point out that most of the roads in the rural area are township roads. Actually, the county has very few miles of actual county highways compared with most counties in Illinois. Over time, they plan to put all the increases in motor fuel tax spending into the rural highways and keep the urban spending capped at $1 million through the year 2016. We have a number of concerns with this, and the first is that this was done without any prior warning to the cities, and it jeopardizes funding for Urbana projects, including Windsor Road, as well as a number of projects in Champaign. The justification that they offered in the resolution was that the county's primary responsibility remains the rural county roads. However, the bulk of the tax money comes from the residents of Champaign and Urbana. And that's both the motor fuel tax and the county highway tax. The county highway tax is a property tax, and that's based on assessed value throughout the county, and it's only spent on rural roads. When you count the people who live in the fringe urban areas, that's an even greater proportion of the tax dollars that come from the urban area. The information presented by the county engineer implied that somehow the county was getting less money than the cities. He said that the way the state distributes motor fuel tax, 49% goes to municipalities and 18% goes to counties. But when you actually look at the distribution of motor fuel tax, Champaign County gets $3 million a year in motor fuel tax funds, and that's based on the number of vehicles in the entire county. So most of the vehicles, 65% of them, I believe, are in Champaign-Urbana. The two cities, Champaign and Urbana, get $3 million. So the county and the cities get pretty much exactly the same amount of money in motor fuel tax. It's not that the cities get more than twice as much as the county. The real question is, what is the fair distribution of this tax money? And I've asked our Public Works Director, Bill Gray, to put together some facts on the number of miles that the city of Urbana is responsible for maintaining within the city limits, how much money we have to do that, what is the average daily traffic count, and the same information for Champaign and for the fringe areas outside the cities, and then for the 200 miles of county highways. In order to come to a fair and equitable distribution of these funds, I think we need to open this up for public discussion, and I propose that we invite the public to a joint meeting between the Urbana City Council, the Champaign City Council, and the county board members that represent Urbana, and Champaign residents. And I've talked with Mayor Schweihart, City Manager Steve Carter, and Bruce Weldon, and everyone's in agreement that we need to air this openly. And I would ask your support in having such a public discussion, and I'm suggesting September 21st at 7 p.m. as a possible date.
And would you like us to just get back to you about that date, or do you propose?
Well, I'd like your support for the concept, and, you might want to study it until the full council meeting, or if you want to do it today. But I think it's pretty basic stuff.
Do any council members have questions for the mayor? Okay, I'm sure there will be more discussion of this, and people can bring concerns or date issues to the mayor so that we could get that scheduled and continue addressing that issue. Is there any other public input at this time? Would any members of the public like to address the council? Okay, yeah, Dennis?
I've got one quick update which might be of interest to people. About a month ago, a resident in my ward who lives adjacent to the Solar Cup area complained of noise and the fact that there was excessive noise, and it was impossible for the person to sleep at night. And we contacted the Public Works Department and had Jason Aerosmith, who is in charge of the environmental control issues for the Public Works, go out and do a decibel reading. We found that the decibels were indeed higher than the allotted approved range for daytime and evening in the city. And I would say the amazing thing is that the manager of Solar Cup actually took a walk with Jason and identified certain places where there was noise emitting from the factory, and agreed to talk to his engineers about remitting the noise or dampening the noise in some way. Well, I went away out of town for a couple of weeks, and just this last week I've been back, and I called the resident today, and he said that not only has the noise basically been resolved, and it is at like kind of like the low background level that it had been when he purchased his home 8 years ago, which is what he hoped would happen, but that the one time that the noise was increased again, all he had to do was call the manager of the plant, and within 45 minutes the noise was reduced. So I'm just saying that this is like a wonderful example of interacting with an important employee plant here in town, and I find that they've been very responsive and helpful to the residents of my ward, and I appreciate it very much.
Any questions or other comments or reports from council members tonight?
I did send a letter to the president of Solo Cup, Mr. Whitley, because I noticed in the Tribune that they did back away from their expansion in Chicago. And I sent him the top 10 list of why they should continue their operation in Urbana and expand in Urbana, including, not the least of which, they have a 17-acre parcel in Urbana. We have all the utilities and infrastructure run to that parcel. We're rebuilding Lerman Avenue and putting lighting in along there. We have relatively low cost and available labor. We have very strong labor in this area. Our costs of doing business are much less. We still have the central location, east-west access, north-south access, the interstates, and we have rail to that plant. So I did send him that. I guess I could share that copy of that article with you, but they backed away completely from their expansion plans, manufacturing expansions in Chicago area. So I thought, what the heck, we'll just send them a letter on behalf of the city, so we did that.
I think it's a great idea.
Any other questions or comments from council? Okay, hearing none, we will proceed with tonight's meeting. The first item of business before us as an ordinance is Ordinance 2005-07-089. This is an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for a fire rescue truck and trailer. And I will hand it over to Rex Munt, our fire chief, to tell us about this ordinance. Chief?
Good evening, thank you. The purpose of this ordinance, as you're aware, is to authorize a budget amendment, authorizing us to move forward with a county/Illinois Emergency Management grant. As my cover letter described, we've been in the emergency rescue services on the rescue side for several years, and approximately 3 to 4 years ago, we became part of the statewide emergency response plan. With that, the need to increase our cache or stockpile of equipment is continuing to grow. The city stepped forward at the very onset. The city administration has been a strong supporter of the rescue program, and when we first started discussing it, agreed to purchase the first trailer, which was a 24-foot trailer costing approximately $10,000. Which you can see by the dollars amount you're seeing in this ordinance, we're now talking much larger vehicles and equipment needs. We had a 12,000-pound trailer. We're now talking a 40-foot trailer that will carry a true load of over 22,000 pounds of equipment. The truck itself is a large, extremely heavy-duty Ford F-550 full crew cab that will carry up to 6 people. Our requirement under the state plan and even in a local response is we need to respond with at least 10 of our technicians to fully deploy the team. So with the approval of this grant, as you notice, it's a 100% reimbursement by the state. We do have, and the city always has believed in providing funding for the VERF, the Vehicle Equipment Replacement Fund, that we're seeing approximately a $6,000 annual payment to the VERF fund. There's a little caveat to that, though, is that we have the option as a city to either replace this equipment at the end of its life or return it back to the state and back away from the program. I don't expect that to happen, but that is the option the city has. It is in the driver's seat of the situation to continue at this level. That does not say we'd step away from being the rescue service for the community, just stepping away from being responsible for being part of the statewide plan. So we're looking, the purchase was authorized through IEMA, through the state purchasing process. It met all the purchasing standards of the city of Urbana, and I'm open for any questions.
Any questions from council members? Yeah, Charlie.
So basically, the bottom line is that if we want to stay in the program 15 years from now, we need to start putting away money. There's a $6,000 a year cost.
That's correct.
That we expect. And that money going to VERF, is it adjusted for inflation every year, or is it just, you know, this shows a fixed cost of $6,000, but do we adjust VERF?
We tweak the VERF every year in 2 respects. One is the cost of the equipment may go up or may go down in the case of technology, and then also the useful lives. We re-examine the useful life of each piece of equipment, and so that materially impacts the cash flow every year, but we look at it every year. It's been our policy not to accept grant equipment unless we set money aside for its replacement, because with pieces of equipment that we have in the fire service, police services, we'd be too big of a hit in any one year. So it's been our sound fiscal policy, I believe, just to set the money aside each year. If we're going to take the equipment, let's replace it. So that's what we do.
And do we expect, an opportunity maybe 15 years from now to go after more state money to replace this equipment? I mean, I don't know what the history of this program has been like at the state level.
In the last 2 to 3 years, the state, and again, this is very dependent upon federal funding. This all trickles down from the federal government. But the state of Illinois has been very upfront in supporting these specialized teams for those issues that have to be replaced. To say that they'll come up and step up, and this purchase process involves statewide over 30 vehicles just for some of the specialized teams, not even talking about how far it grows into law. There's a combination of law enforcement and fire in this whole grant statewide. So the question, Charlie, is yes, and we would hope that there would still be continued. Well, let's put it this way. With this day and age, I would hope we have a problem finding federal funding just because the government's not worrying about terrorism. This is all based on the terrorism aspect of the funding from the federal government. So it's a double-edged sword. We hope we're in a position to find support at that time, but I would say we'd hope we don't find it for the same reasons.
Does having this equipment and the training add to our improved fire rating?
No, it does not. It does improve our local ability to transport the equipment we do have immediately. Okay. We are in a position to deploy our team locally, but it takes a little longer right now to get all the equipment out on the street. And so this means immediate response.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, Dennis.
So this is a truck that is sort of geared to be used for possible national emergencies or local emergencies that have national implications.
National implications maybe so. Is designed and is configured so that we are in a position to deploy our team anywhere in the state.
That's what I was wondering.
Yes.
So we would be available to a situation would occur in Chicago or down in the southern part of the state or anywhere there'd be a disaster occurrence or
Yes.
such.
As we stand today in the city of Chicago, the fire department's response cards currently list the city of Urbana's technical rescue team
Yeah.
at the 4th level, which would be figured due to the area of equipment in that area. But we are in their response cards right now.
And some of the equipment that we'll be carrying on this truck, is this things like bomb handling material or waste disposal material, or is it kind of unique and special to the projects that might occur?
With our technical rescue team, we would carry neither of those items. The bomb situation would come through like the local EOD or bomb squad as well as other squads in the state, and the hazardous waste issues would be handled in our locality here by the city of Champaign's fire department, because they're the regional hazmat team, we're the regional technical rescue.
Okay.
So to give you a snippet, we have some very sensitive search equipment. We have the cameras and listening devices. We are equipped, and now we'll be with this trailer and truck combination, we'll be able to start carrying our heavy concrete supplies that we are trained and equipped to take on a concrete structure collapse. Bottom line, technical rescue is a lot of heavy tools.
Okay.
Are there other questions? Yeah, Mayor.
Where would you keep this vehicle?
It will be stationed at our campus station. One nice thing about this, and they just passed a new policy within the state level, is this truck, it has to be dedicated. Again, it's funded 100% by the state, and so they're very protective, and I respect that. That's not used for grocery store runs. But we are allowed, since we do have a hazardous material trailer located at the very same station, we are authorized to be able to use this any day in our normal operational issues for response. So the vehicle is not just dedicated just to the one trailer, so it has some multiple use to it.
Thank you.
Lynn, do you have questions?
No, I was going to move to submit it.
Oh, yes, go right ahead. A motion would be in order.
I move to submit ordinance number 2005-07089, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance, fire rescue truck and trailer, to the council.
Recommendation
With a
for-
recommendation for approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, would all in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. Next up, we have a discussion of city streetlights in the 7 to 800 block of South Weber. The way this will work, since there are a few members of the public who have chosen to speak on this issue, the members of the public will get will get 5 minutes to speak before we take any action, and then once we start working on the item, I'll hand the floor over to Dennis to describe it and also to Public Works to speak. So first, the members of the public, I have Lisa Power of 809 South Weber. Feel free to come up and you can state your name and tell us for 5 minutes, give your input on the streetlight issue.
My name is Lisa Power, and I live at 809 South Weber. I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to be here tonight. Joining me is Chris and Krista Zionic and their new son, Jack. They're my next-door neighbors. About a year ago, I emailed the former mayor about having streetlights installed on the 800 block of South Weber Street. And what I was told at that time was that because the original developer hadn't installed lights, that we would have to pay for them ourselves. I let it drop at the time because I didn't think anyone would want to pay for street lights. About a week ago, the Zionics approached me and thought that we should make a presentation to the council, making a formal request. We've had a number of car break-ins on our street. I don't know that they've even been reported. We've realized that there are 3 registered sex offenders within a 6-block area of our neighborhood, and frankly, it's scary out there. So before we made this presentation, I wanted to do a little research on the original developer of our subdivision, and what I found was that our block of Weber Street, along with the 2 streets on either side of us, Anderson and Lynn Streets, were all one parcel at one time. It was part of the city for as far back as 1913. the former mayor, James Elmo Smith, bought that property in 1922, and he immediately subdivided it, submitted a plat to the city, and it was approved. So at the time that the subdivision was approved, it was submitted by the mayor of Urbana, and for whatever reason, he wasn't required to install streetlights. So that's a little bit of history. What we're asking for, these are streetlights and street improvements. They're not private benefit. We all have porch lights, so we're not looking to light our own properties. I think streetlights are a public improvement, just like storm sewers and traffic lights and sidewalks, bike paths, and the city doesn't, as far as I know, especially assess property owners for most of those improvements anyway. I looked through the city code. I can't find any requirement in there that private property owners provide their own streetlights. And in fact, there's a provision in the city code that does not require developers to provide streetlights. So I'm not sure how the city has streetlights. I would think that the city has paid for a number of them. Over the past couple of years, we on our street and the two on the side of us have seen the city replace lights in our neighborhood surrounding us. They've taken down the old lights and put up new ones, which are very nice, but throughout this time, our streets have remained completely dark. They have a big tree canopy, no light gets through there, and we would have, I'll speak for myself, but I would have loved to have had hand-me-down lights from some of those other streets, because I think a lot of them are still working. So we would have loved to have had those. I know that street lights on the 700 and 800 block of Weber is not a high capital project. It's not a high priority for the city. I've looked at your capital projects, and you have a lot of them, and a lot of them that you can't pay for right now. So, you know, I recognize that, but I'm just asking that you consider our request, and especially consider that I really don't think it's legitimate to ask property owners to pay for their own street lights. And I would just ask you at least to reconsider that opinion.
Okay, do council members have any questions for Ms. Power? None? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have Chris Zionic speaking again on the topic of streetlights on Weber Street.
Good evening. My name is Chris Zionic. I live at 807 South Weber, and as Lisa, my neighbor, has mentioned, we've had some difficulty with vandalism, people rifling through automobiles. What pushed me really to act, to start contacting neighbors, was they had all along just gotten into vehicles that were parked on the road. Well, maybe 2 to 3 weeks ago, they had gotten so bold as to get into vehicles that are parked in my driveway very close to entrances to my house, and I thought, you know, something needs to be done. And I talked to my neighbors, and oddly enough, I had also had a conversation with Mayor Satterthwaite regarding streetlights. When they had replaced the streetlights on Oregon, they'd taken down perfectly good working streetlights, replaced those with brand new streetlights, and I thought, well, if they can do that on Oregon, they can certainly install some streetlights on my block. He told me at that time as well that I should get together with my neighbors, we should pitch in and install streetlights, and I thought, well, that sounds a lot like taxation, and that's exactly what I submit we should do, is use the tax money from the city of Urbana to install streetlights to help abate crime and vandalism issues in our neighborhood. Earlier the discussion went to 1005 Colorado development crime issues. The first thing was mentioned was lighting. The park, people hanging out after dark, lighting was brought up again. It's a common sense issue. It needs to be done. Correct the mistake that was made by allowing the mayor to develop it without streetlights to begin with. I thank you.
Do council members have any questions for Mr. Zionic? None? Okay, at this point, the meeting will turn to the council portion of the meeting. Mr. Roberts, why don't you introduce the discussion item for us?
Well, I think it's been pretty much summarized what the perceived problem is on these 3 blocks in my ward. This is in the blocks that are bounded by Washington on the south and Maine on the north, Cottage Grove to Vine, which is basically the Huna Neighborhood Association neighborhood. All of the blocks have lighting except these three, and they're kind of in the middle of the southern end of the neighborhood, and it is like kind of a non sequitur not to have any lighting on these particular streets. It's like an omission, and obviously now we've learned that the omission occurred, 65 years ago or something, when the plat was approved without any kind of lighting or facilities for those neighbors purchasing property there. I got a call from Krista and Chris and Lisa asking me what I might be able to do for them in the neighborhood, and so I did contact Bill Gray in the Public Works Department, because I'm certainly not an expert on the details of how streetlights can be introduced into a neighborhood. It made sense to me that it seems to be an oversight, but I asked Bill to inform me a little bit about the procedure of how one might correct that, and if Bill could perhaps talk to us now. He kind of outlined to me on the phone the procedure, and I think it would be most helpful to the residents of the area to have some information that would be useful to them.
Yeah, Mr. Gray, go right ahead. This is Bill Gray, the Director of Public Works here in Urbana.
The city has specific policies for these types of requests, and I was asked to look at the 700 block of South Weber Street, and I spent a little time late last week to try to put together this handout to give you a little outline of how this would occur. First of all, a couple comments. Yes, we did replace the series street lighting, the obsolete street lighting, in the last many years. It's unusable and can't be reused. The parts are no longer available and such, and this was the basis back in 1994 when we came up with the streetlight master plan to replace the existing lighting system. So I want to be clear that the poles and lights that maybe appeared to have been fine, we were at a very critical juncture where, had it been tried to keep lit much longer, we were literally not able to replace lamps, for example, not to mention transformers, controllers, and these sorts of things. So the critical components were no longer being made. However, if we were to duplicate the type of street lighting, for example, that is a few blocks to the west, such as on Urbana or Maple Street between Oregon and Washington, the design would be very straightforward. If we had the tall poles, which are 30-foot tall poles, spaced approximately every 175 feet or so, it would be about 4 poles. Very similar situation to those blocks a little further west.
And these are not the globe poles. These are
tall poles
tall
with a mast arm, correct, with a metal halide white light.
And I noticed that they exist on Grove Street.
Okay.
Adjacent to these.
Okay. So the cost would be around $16,000, and this is assuming, again, this would get into engineering if we were to proceed, that we would be able to extend off an existing system either on Washington or Oregon Street. In other words, if we have to add a controller for some reason, that would be more money. But we think we can do it with our very preliminary digging into this. So past practice and policy is that 60% of the property owners need to support an assessment, and you can call it a tax, you can call it assessment, whatever, but there would need to be 60% of people at least would be interested in seeing further study, further evaluation, development of the project go forward. Mind you, in 1998 or 99, City Council reduced that number. It used to be 80% of the people had to require a petition before we would proceed. So specifically for street lighting, because as you heard this evening, there is some compelling reasons why perhaps there should be more street lighting in the community. So to make it a little more plausible, if you will, that percentage was dropped from 80% to 60%. Similarly, the public benefit portion is 50%. So the city, if a project is to proceed, the city would contribute 50% of the costs. The benefiting property owners would pay 50% of the cost. Again, in the past, the public benefit portion would be like 30 or 40%, depending on the type of project. So it was raised to 50%. Now, again, per policy, if someone paid for street lighting years ago, whether it was with the cost of the lot or through a special assessment decades ago, policy is not to double tax them if it's a corner lot. So, for example, if you turn the back side to the aerial, the benefiting property owners are those in the yellow or highlighted yellow boundaried lots. The corner lots, at some point in the past, on Oregon at the corner and on Washington on the two corners, paid for lighting because Oregon and Washington Street are lit. So the benefiting property owners in this particular case, per our policy, are those in the yellow boxes. With that assumption and with the assumption of the cost and the public benefit, again, these are estimates, but to give you an order of magnitude, we estimate it would be about $421 per lot. Typically, a special assessment would run 10 years, and right now I'm saying it's 5% interest, maybe it's 4 3/4, whatever, but just to be just for talking round numbers, the cost per 50-foot lot would be $55 a year for 10 years. You could pay it off in a lump sum. That's a possibility. So a timetable, if we were to proceed, is this. We would need to see at least 60% of the property owners expressing an interest that they'd like to see more information developed for a street lighting project on this 700-800 block of Weber Street. Then we would produce some actual project costs. Then there would be a city council meeting. We would invite certainly all the people that live on that block and all the property owners on that block to attend. And the city council would pass an ordinance proposing the project. Then there would be 60 days after that passage of an ordinance where the property owners that would pay for this assessment, if they didn't want the assessment to proceed, would have to submit a petition saying we don't want this project. The costs are too high, we don't want the street lights, whatever the reasons are. That's just a process, a due process of 60 days. And 51% of those people would have to say, nope, we don't want the project. But if the property owners are silent, or let me say it a different way, they're supportive of the project, then there would be a subsequent council action taking that officially then creates an assessment area, or what's called a special service area. And then we would proceed with finishing the plans. We'd go out for bids, we'd construct the project. Being that it's 1 block long, it would be a relatively straightforward project. Probably wouldn't take more than a month. We use directional boring techniques, so there's not a lot of disruption of the property. The foundations and poles and such obviously would have to be ordered. There's a little lead time in ordering equipment. But the cable, light fixtures, ballasts, et cetera, could be done in probably a month's time once the materials were arrived. And I would say if this neighborhood wanted to proceed and council ordinances were approved, it very easily could be accomplished next year.
Questions? Yeah, Dennis?
Yeah, look, so a couple things. So mainly what you're saying is, from what I understand of our discussion also on the phone, is that it's not necessarily a right for the residents to have street lighting?
Not by city council. Couple comments. Number one is, as was already stated this evening, for new developments, that's an elective matter with developers. We do not require new street lighting in new subdivisions.
Say that new developments are on the edge of town.
Correct. Correct. So typically the street lightings years ago were done by assessment or were part of a subdivision development and was paid as part of the lot. So if a homeowner bought a lot, bought a house, the costs were embedded in that cost of the lot, as were the streets and sidewalks and sewers too. So those are usually how such street lighting was done. The property owner would have paid for it at some point years ago. Now there is one exception. There are certain areas of the city that are eligible for community development block grant money. Street lighting is one type of infrastructure improvement or those funds can help pay for. I don't know that this area it would qualify or not for that, but I know there's some areas of the city in the block grant areas that there has been street lighting done in those circumstances.
So if that were true, and it seems like this is a Census Tract 55, which would be actually eligible for block grant proposals, it seems to me, as I remember. So that is something that you would, that the neighbor, well, who would instigate a request? Would it be the neighborhood association would instigate a request? Would the city instigate a request for block grant?
I don't know if Mrs. Bullock would want to comment on that, but my understanding is that would probably be a proper thing to do, is request it. We need to confirm if it's eligible, is it in the block grant area, et cetera. And then that project would compete with other projects, that are block grant funded.
In the city?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Other council members have any questions? Yes, Charlie.
Yeah. Case. What happens sort of historically? Do properties that have streetlights have a higher value, a higher assessed value, or whatever, so that people invest in streetlights now? Do they get it back when they sell their property later?
That's probably a better question for a realtor or the assessor, but in my opinion, when infrastructure improvements like sidewalks and streets and street lighting are made, typically that investment comes back more than the out-of-pocket expense of the homeowner. To answer your question, yes, usually that's going to help with property values. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Is there any reason why we don't, since we this issue comes up a lot. We've got other sections of the city that don't have street lights. Again, they were built because there was no requirement to do street lights. Should we change that so that it doesn't come back to haunt a council 20 years or 50 years from now?
Well, my only comment is that to weigh that decision, you need to know then from staff how many millions of dollars you're talking about in potential improvements.
Because no, I'm just saying that for new developments that
we're
not
I'm sorry.
new developments.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, new developments.
You can.
Because it seems like it just comes back to haunt.
There's again, a consideration would be generally on development code matters. We like to mirror what other surrounding communities may have as far as those requirements. You don't want to make development less desirable here. You could argue maybe this would make it more desirable, of course, but outside of that, yes, we could write that into our development codes.
Other questions?
And then last question is, how many other streets do we have in the city that don't have lights at this point? I know there's some areas down in Lynn Barnes area.
In your CIP booklet that we passed out, the capital improvement plan, I believe there's a map that shows what's lit and what's unlit.
Okay.
And percent-wise, ballpark, it's probably 50-50. It may be more unlit than lit.
Okay, and last question is, the city has a lot of the shorter globe lights. Are they more I know you need to use more of them to get the same lighting coverage. Does that?
It would essentially double this project.
Doubles the cost.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So the neighborhood needs to consider
if
that.
Globe was to be considered, you could, again, we'd have to run the numbers, but it'd be basically double these numbers. And the main reason is you need twice as many poles to get a consistent lighting.
Okay.
So it's an option then?
Oh, sure.
But you'd have to want to pay for your option.
Yes, Mr. Weldon?
Yeah, I can't remember if the Census Tract 55 boundary is Washington or Illinois, but I do know in the 80s we spent about $100,000 on globe replacement in that area from block grant. The second thing is I did broach this topic, and Libby was with me, with Savoy and Champaign. We're pretty much in lockstep together on our development standards. It's very has been important, at least in the past, to have the same requirements, engineering requirements. And we did broach this. We'd had a regional development meeting last month, and we did throw on the table the notion that everyone going to some sort of street lighting standard for new development. So people are thinking about it, whether we can get everyone to go along with it or not, I don't know. I'd also point out that we've had at this council chambers many evenings where people have come to complain that they didn't want lights. So, especially in the southern parts of our community, because they don't like the glow. So, we've had requests both ways on that. But anyway, I think we could do a little staff work on the block grant issue.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Yes, Mayor.
Would tall streetlights work when you have the heavy tree canopy?
Well, unfortunately, we're careful as to where you place them, but where we have very mature trees, such as these neighborhoods we're talking about, that's a tricky situation. And sometimes we don't get the most ideal lighting 6 months out of the year when you have leaves, on the trees, but we try to locate them as best we can. Sometimes we may do a little trimming around a light to try to enhance things, but it's not perfect always. Winter time, 6 months out of the year, it's fine.
Other questions from council members?
Aaron may have an answer for us.
Okay, we'll take one more minute here.
I would just like to say, I guess, something, Brandon, that this particular section of the neighborhood, it's not a new development. It's a very old development, and it's completely surrounded by streets that have good lighting, and it's just this pocket of darkness in the middle of basically a well-lit neighborhood area that's probably a mile long and half a mile wide. And so it's almost like retrofitting something that should have probably happened 60 years ago. So I think that the requestees have a slightly different legitimacy to their request than maybe developments that were added to the city in the 70s and 80s farther south that opted not to have lighting for various reasons. So that's just a comment I have.
I've had my cars broken into and vandalized parked directly under a city globe light. So.
Well, I'm not saying that's impossible.
No.
I mean, I imagine cars are broken into during daylight hours as well. What we're talking about, though, is an upgrade for the neighborhood, which would probably increase property value, and I would think that the police department would comment that it's usually safer to have a lit street than not in a neighborhood. So I guess we'd be interested to find out from the grants department whether the area would be eligible for block grant consideration.
Yeah, Dr. Tyler, Ms. Bullock, do you have anything to add now?
Or is it too soon?
We think it is in an eligible block group. Maps are so small, it's hard to tell the picture.
Did you say eligible or not eligible?
Eligible.
Eligible.
We think 90%
Right.
sure, but I would need a better map to know 100%.
Okay.
It seems like maybe this has been basically termed a discussion. I think we've discovered basic information. Probably the property owners on the street would like to have a meeting or something and determine what step they'd like to take forward. And this could come back to City Council next Committee of the Whole as a proposal. Yeah.
Yes, very briefly. Yeah, you can come up to the microphone very briefly and just add to your public input.
This is Lisa Power again. I neglected to provide I did circulate a petition, and I do have some signatures on it. I don't know what percent. The issue, though, is that there are a number of homes on our street that are rental units, so it makes it more difficult to, number one, circulate a petition among the property owners because I'll have to figure out who that is, and then they may not be as interested in the benefit as the people who live there and who actually use the streets. So if I could just
Yeah, if you could leave a copy with the clerk here at the left, she can share with us and with Mr. Gray so that we all know what property owners might
City
be
staff
for.
can help you determine who owns what
Okay.
also through there.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Okay, if there's no further discussion, the next item on tonight's agenda is an ordinance, Ordinance 2005-07088, amending Schedule J of Section 23-183 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code, prohibiting parking at all times on certain streets. This is with regard to Stone Creek Boulevard. This is a Public Works item. So, Mr. Gray, I'll let you give the report here.
This was a recent Traffic Commission item, and it segues into the concrete bike path construction that's going to be occurring this summer along the balance of the Stone Creek Boulevard, which is almost 2 miles long. We did receive, in fact, open bids today. There were very favorable bids from area contractors, so we're anxious and anticipating that work. But one item we need to consider is the center median bike path cannot stay in that median all the way to a state route, which is only Route 130 High Cross Road. So we have to transition that median via striping at the corner of Stricker Lane and High Cross Road to an on-street path. There is a sidewalk also in that area for pedestrians, but there will be bicycle striped bike lane on street. But to allow that to occur within the available street pavement width, we need to prohibit parking. There is no parking impact to the folks to the south as they access Nugent Street there, but in the businesses, or excuse me, homes to the north, which aren't built yet, again, will have their rear yards facing there. So there should not be an impact there also. So it's the recommendation that we would prohibit parking on that one stretch of Stone Creek Boulevard to accommodate on-street bike path striping.
Questions? Yes, Charlie?
No question. I just move that we send this to council for approval.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, would all those in favor of sending this please say aye?
Aye.
Those against, nay. That motion carries. Thank you very much. Next, we have Resolution 2005-07011R, a resolution of support for application for Illinois Transportation Enhancement Funds by the City of Urbana for the High Cross Road Bike Path. Again, Mr. Gray with Public Works.
Okay. I'm going to ask Mr. Miller to assist me here. Doug put together this grant application. We learned about this enhancement application a month and a half, 2 months ago, and learned that it was an August 1st deadline. We wanted to put a project forward to try to capture 80% funding. We looked at the eligible projects that fit within the requirements of enhancement dollars, and the collective wisdom was to proceed with this project and literally get the biggest bang for the buck because of its expense and try for it. But I'll turn it over to Doug to go into some of the details of this project.
I don't have a lot of other comments. As Bill said, we had projected this project in 2009, but they called for the grants earlier than we had anticipated. It's the strongest candidate that I can find that we can pursue by the grant deadline. Florida Avenue was projecting the CIP a little bit earlier, but we're not ready to apply for a grant by August 1st for that one. We're still under discussion on that project. It is a large project. We will get, if we are successful in the grant application, as I said in the memo, our out-of-pocket costs could be very low, less than $50,000, less than as low as $20,000. I have had some initial contact with the Department of Transportation and the Department of Natural Resources regarding the project, since we're on a short time frame, and they have had no negative comments about this. DNR is another grant that we would apply for in March, and I've talked to them and they concur with my projections. So I also talked to Illinois Power. One of the basis for this bike path to the west of the right-of-way would be that we could install it on existing easements, most of which would be at least an Illinois Power easement. There's a large easement from Windsor to Florida, and then there's another easement North of that, we haven't identified or located the width on that one yet. So, but Illinois Power is agreed that that is a possibility. They've done it in other locations in the city with the Urbana Park District. Property owners, I have not had any negative comments from anybody or businesses in that area. In fact, they're all positive as far as existing bike path on bike traffic on High Crest Road. So,
Are there any questions? Charlie?
So you're saying basically the timing of this whole thing is what makes this the best project?
timing and size of the project, because this is an enhancement program, we don't know whether this program will be renewed, and this is an 80% grant that we'd be applying for. DNR grants are 50%, so it's both timing and the size of the project.
Lynn?
In response to the News Gazette article, I had a couple constituents just ask whether it was going to be concrete or asphalt, and that bikers apparently prefer asphalt. So I know that there's a lot of considerations, so I just share that with you as some constituent information.
There is, with concrete, it's a type of material from a long-term maintenance standpoint that will withstand less future maintenance to it as far as seal coating or overlays or what have you. I realize that with concrete we do have to saw cut a joint every so often. It's a very fine joint, and some may find that objectionable, but generally it's not nothing really too noticeable, but I've heard that. As far as what is easier to jog or run on, asphalt versus concrete, they're both pretty hard. I mean, some say the asphalt is less of an impact than concrete, but there's other pros and cons. We've been successful with pretty much, we've done some of each, but for the most part, especially for these, when there's 80% money involved, we've gone with concrete. Goodwin Avenue is just being finished up in concrete. Stone Creek, we received a grant for, that's going to be in concrete. I know the Park District has some concrete paths also. You could probably debate this quite some time, but put it this way, this isn't final that it has to be concrete, and we will reconsider the two products again, but I just know from a long-term maintenance standpoint, we're the ones that have to maintain these facilities. We kind of look at that a little stronger than the asphalt. So, but I appreciate that comment, and we will definitely take a second look just to be sure. So, by stating what we're doing tonight, it's more the dollars than it is the specific design.
Okay.
Other questions? Yeah.
No, I just I would move to submit ordinance resolution number 2005-07-011R, resolution of support for application of Illinois Transportation Enhancement Funds by the City of Urbana.
Is there a second?
I would second it.
Okay. And is there any further discussion of this item? Hearing none, would those in favor please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That motion carries. Next this evening, we have two ordinances. This is the last Public Works item. These two go together. This is 2005-07-111, an ordinance approving and authorizing the execution of an agreement for use of right-of-way, and 2005-07-109, an ordinance vacating a portion of Park Street and Maple Street. And when the time comes, these could both be sent to council in a single motion. Again, for Public Works, Mr. Gray.
Okay. Any opening comments? Or
No, take it away.
All right. Wasn't sure. Mr. Walden and I had a recent meeting with the developer, 5 Points Northeast LLC developer, and he submitted to us his first footprint of a retail center at this location, which is, again, just north and a little east of the new Walgreens that's going up at the corner of Cunningham and University. And one thing that would really help with this development is to have a little more space, or a 10-foot strip on Maple Street and a 10-foot strip on Park Street. The ironic thing is that as part of his platting that occurred, subdividing of the lots of this larger parcel, which included the Walgreens, there was a dedication of the exact 10-foot to add to Maple Street right-of-way and to the Park Street right-of-way. And what he knows now, and with the size of the development, et cetera, he is now requesting if we would favorably consider vacating, which was something recently dedicated. So there's a map enclosed. There's a sketch of the footprint of the retail center. And so that gray shaded 10-foot wide strip is the location that he's talking about. Mind you, the 50-foot on Maple, 40-foot respective right-of-way width on Park Street had been that way for decades, going to at least back to the 60s, and it has functioned fine as a chip and seal, unimproved type roadway supporting the businesses that are in this location in the past and that are still there. So staff doesn't have a problem looking at this vacation. I want to point out to you that we see this as a portion of a street right-of-way vacation. It's not a full width or a full 60-foot or a full 50-foot width vacation where we would, by virtually closing the street, we're not doing that. We're just vacating a portion of the street. Secondly, past policy is that we would look at the fair market value or have that piece of land appraised, and then the benefiting non-residential property owner would pay that appraised value. Again, we're looking at this as that it was land that literally a month ago was dedicated to the city, and now it's being asked to be vacated. We think that's something that's forgivable, I guess, in this particular circumstance. It's kind of a highly unusual situation.
Keep in mind at that time we didn't have the site plan.
We had no site plan.
So at the very last minute, we decided to require this dedication because we didn't know how it was going to fit on the site. If we knew then what we know today, we wouldn't have required this.
Yep.
So we're trying to undo what we did.
And then a component of this tonight is a request to allow 90-degree parking to the east side or the back ends of this retail center. They would it'd be used primarily for access for deliveries, perhaps trash pickup and employee parking, that sort of thing. The developer would like to have this additional parking to fit with the uses and intensity of uses for parking on the site. We have some examples of 90-degree parking off streets elsewhere in the community that are within right-of-way. It does take a license agreement to do this sort of action. It's kind of a special action, if you will. The developer knows that the costs associated with building this parking would be at the developer's expense, not the city's expense, which would include some drainage work along with the roadway parking striping work, along with future maintenance responsibilities. I think I've covered.
Are there any
If you have any questions, I guess. There's two action items that need to occur.
Yeah, and we can, I think, take them as one motion tonight to send both to council, and then next week separate votes will be needed. Any questions? Yeah, Dennis.
My brain went somewhere else, just as you were saying. Who would be responsible for basically upgrading the section of the vacated area to make them into like parking areas?
Mm-hmm. Developer.
The developer would.
Developer.
Is the city also responsible for upgrading Maple Street behind that development? Do you have plans for making that any different than it is today?
We have no near-term plans to do that. It's a functional road. It's not the greatest road in the world, but it's a functional road at this point. But we don't have any near-term capital improvement dollars or what have you to develop that particular stretch.
I think the answer is we need to wait and see what happens to the north of this development project. As you know, there's another piece between here and Crystal Lake Drive. We have an access issue here on the major thoroughfares, and this road needs to stay open. If with further development we need to make an improvement there, we'll do it. It'll probably be TIF dollars if we do it. Right now, we're not planning on it.
Then this is a thought that occurred to me, and it's almost a tangential thought, but because we talked about bike paths in the city, and we're talked about funding certain ones tonight, or applying for grants to fund them. I was looking at the bike the current bike path map that was attached to the previous ordinance concerning Philo Road, High Cross Road. And what I noticed was that it's very difficult we don't have very good connections for bike routes north and south in the near downtown area. And if it's unlikely that Cunningham Avenue will be a bike path because of its traffic and the nature of it being a main artery, there's no way for a bicyclist to go from the Huna neighborhood north to the proposed bike paths that are going to be at the Shawmunger Park and all these other sites. So I guess what I was wondering is, there might be a feasibility of using this street as a possible bike path in the future. We haven't talked about it, there's no plan, there's nothing discussed about it, but if it were to happen, it would be useful to incorporate, think about, accessibility for alternative traffic routes along Maple Street, because it might become an ideal non-commercial route for travelers.
I don't think anything we're doing here would preclude that from consideration in the future.
Yeah. I guess what I was wondering is the gray strip that goes along the boundary, which I assume is going to be like is that a sidewalk, proposed sidewalk?
No, the gray strip is the vacated.
Is the vacated property? Okay. All right.
Yes.
All right. Well, then I'm just putting on the record now that in the future this street might become a lot more worth to the city, and we should think about it in terms of alternative traveling use.
So noted.
Yes, Lynn.
I move to send both ordinance number 2005-07111 and ordinance number 2005-07109 to council with a motion for approval.
A second?
I would second that.
Seconded. Is there any further discussion on these items? Hearing none, would those in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Those two items carry. Next up, we have item number